the plan today is really to discuss cybersecurity as it relates to what has happened in the last few months. I even made a point of I had to go back and look up to see when was this kind of hit, and I saw that was mid-March is when the pandemic was actually declared and national emergency was declared. So if we use that as kind of our starting point, what I wanted to do was evaluate from our own perspectives what has changed with cybersecurity, what happened at that initial outbreak, what's changed since then, and then long term, how do we address any of our own workforces that are going to be remote for an extended period, or even collectively as a community, as a society, how do we better support those people? So we'll use that as the jumping off point. And Nicole, I'm going to turn to you. And I think you've got obviously a very unique perspective being at the hospital there. But if you can go back to mid-March or so, can you talk us through, were there immediate changes from an IT cybersecurity perspective that hit right away? Or was it kind of business as usual? There's just more of an emergency situation here.
Yeah, where to begin? So when the pandemic was declared, we really just had to pivot all of the projects that we were working on and kind of just throw people out the door as quickly as possible. We had to have our leaders kind of step back and let us know who can work from home and what kind of, how are we going to set them up? Did we have the laptops? Because even before the pandemic, most of you probably know, but that getting those laptops was already difficult. So do we have the hardware we need to get them out of the door safely working from home? And just kind of had to evaluate that and who should have, our Cisco AnyConnect access and who could use SecureLink from a personal device, and then getting a lot of primarily clinical people at the hospital who really enjoy meetings and meeting in person to learn how to use WebEx. That has been an adventure as well. And we still struggle with audio, and clearly I'm struggling with my webcam today. So those are still things that we're struggling with, but we're getting there slowly but surely. And something that's kind of interesting that happened fairly soon after the pandemic was declared was our clinicians were really looking for ways to get eyes on the patient, the patients, without having to go into the room every single time, because we have that additional level of layer of issue with the PPE, right? So we were getting requests from physicians to put baby monitors in the rooms, and also some of the CMS telehealth restrictions were removed. So we outfitted almost an entire floor with baby monitors in every room, and I personally got to deploy those, which was an adventure. Definitely not being clinical. And then we also, another thing we did is we were in the process of deploying iPhones for secure texting, and we had to pivot the use of those devices to being able to call into the room. So we set the clinicians up with an iPad, and then they could go to a private space and call into that room. And most of those patients that we have with COVID are one-on-one, and so they would be, and by one-to-one, I mean they're sitting with one staff member throughout their stay at Mary Greeley. And so they were able to use the iPhones for FaceTime. So they weren't using that as a substitute for everything, of course, because we want to make sure that we have that personal care, personal touch with our patients. But in order to preserve PPE, those are some of the measures that we put into place. So it was just kind of an added layer of, well, we have to have all these workers now be remote and all of the challenges that came with that. And then also, kind of within the hospital, what can we do to help with the patient care from a technological perspective?
And Nicole, you were trying to make all this happen with how big of an IT staff at the hospital there?
Oh man, maybe 25.
Got it. And you could have used another 25, I'm guessing?
Yes, absolutely. Still.
Still. So Alex, what was it like in mid-March there? Did you just pack everybody up and send them home, or how did that work?
Well, Kingland had a really interesting scenario happen. So, as we know, the coronavirus started in China, and we actually have operations in China. We have about 100 people in China. So, before the epidemic turned pandemic and came to America, we actually had all of our staff in China working remote. And what was interesting about that is it was sort of the foretaste of what we got to experience here in the States. And about the time in March, when we literally did basically send everybody home, we'll come back to that, everyone in China in the offices started coming back in the offices. And so we got sort of a full circle test before things started in March. And what we've been blessed in many ways based on our business is all technology focused, but we already had VPN set up. We already had endpoint protection. We already had these foundational things in place. And we had individuals working periodically remotely. So we had a little bit of practice. We had a business continuity plan that we could then implement. And what was really interesting is, as a leadership team, we determined to do a day test. Could we run the whole business remote for a day? Well, we planned that out, and we never had people come back. And while I'm in the office today, most people are not. We have the opportunity to optionally come in. So we're continuing to run almost completely remote. But those first few days were interesting because a lot of the things that you just assume would be in place, you learned very quickly whether your assumption was correct or not. And we can explore those things further, but we had the challenge of, like everybody else, projects in motion, security projects in motion. We're doing network penetration tests with a third party. We're doing security audits. Not to mention, the core of the business, writing software, deploying solutions, things like that. And all of a sudden, just like Nicole was saying, everything is WebEx, everything is remote. There are no whiteboards to problem solve or anything like that. Some of the things that we already had in place was using corporate devices for nearly everybody. And so we had Microsoft MAM and MDM for cell phones and machine certificates on our laptops. So that worked really well, except for this group of about 50 employees that actually fall within my group, and they were interns, Iowa State University interns. And we never thought we'd have to go remote with them. We even had contracted like trailers that if the building was taken out by a tornado, they could work in that. So we really didn't have a good plan for them. So we literally said, here's your desktop. Please take that to your dorm room. And then eventually this Kingland equipment is traveling throughout the Midwest as they go home. And so we're moving away from that now and using AWS workspaces to do a VDI solution for that population. So there was a lot of tests of how real are these plans that we've put in place for a long time. And fortunately, a lot of good things happened, but there was a lot of lessons learned through the process.
So Jeremy, it's, Alex has got business continuity to fall back on there. There was good planning in place for the most part that saw them through, and sounds like there was plenty of that with the hospital. Working with the smaller organizations and companies like you do around Ames, what was your experience? Was there a mad scramble for you to come in and help? Or was it hopefully maybe some folks that already had their plans in place?
Yeah, I would put my customers in about 3 different categories. You had the ones that were just shut down, that couldn't open their doors. And then you had the ones that were essential, that had to open their doors and keep going. And then you had those that had the option. Some employees didn't want to come in, and the employer would have a conversation with them about how we could get them up and running. And so the solution, I use a remote monitoring and management tool that includes Log Me In, PCmatic, some other security solutions. And so with Log Me In, they could basically just log into their computer remotely, securely through two-factor authentication and still get in and do their work and even do remote printing if they needed to. So that solution really saved a lot of my customers so that they could keep going. And we really didn't, none of my customers really missed a beat. We just switched them over to that and they kept going, and it was really a blessing.